Hello everyone, this is Kim with the Painted Cottage, and in this video I'm going to show you how I used a paint inlay on these three projects. This is the paint that I used, the Paint Inlay, my favorite brushes for smalls. This is my sealer, and this is the transfer that I used. So first, we are going to get started with the first step, and that is painting our stuff. So my paint is a little bit goopy, so I am going to just thin it down with some water to get it to the consistency that I like. And now I am going to apply my first coat of paint. I'm going to get 2 coats of paint for full coverage, and this is the first coat. These Paint Pixie brushes are my favorite for painting smalls. I have a French tip and a Lil Frenchie. This is the Lil Frenchie, and I love these 2 paint brushes. They hold a lot of paint. They have dense bristles. They have tapered bristles, so it's just really good for applying a smooth finish and really getting into some of those grooves and crevices. I have applied 2 coats of paint already, and now I am getting a 3rd layer on so I can apply my paint inlay. So you need to apply the paint inlay onto wet paint. I have already taken my sheets of the paint inlay and cut them to size. I just want to fit them on this panel here around the entire piece. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm applying that onto the wet paint, and I am rubbing that in so that that paint on the inlay can really adhere onto this project. So I'm rubbing, getting creases out, and then I'm going to wrap that around the whole piece. Now, when I go around the corners, because this is not a flat, straight piece, when I go around the corners, I have to adjust this image a little bit. So here we are. So you can see that we have a little bit of an issue. So I'm just going to cut that so that I can shape that around these curves. And once I see how that lays down, then I can put my another coat of paint on. So this is going to be that, again, that application of the wet paint for that paint inlay to adhere to. So I ran out of the length of that first piece, and now I am just lining up the second piece and adding this. And this is only going to wrap around a little bit, and then I will cut the excess off of this where it meets up with the first piece. Now I am just spritzing this paint inlay with water. Again, pushing that down, just making sure that we get a good transfer of that paint inlay onto this box. And once we are done with this, I am going to set that aside for about an hour and just let that dry completely. Moving on to the next box, I am using a little bit of my leftover paint inlay from that first sheet, measuring out. So it's nice, they have grid lines on these paint inlays. So one side you can see the image really well, that's where the paint is, and then on the back you can see those grid lines really well. So I am cutting along those grid lines after I've measured out that space. Again, applying a coat of paint so that I can put that paint inlay onto the wet paint. And again, I am spritzing this with water and then taking a cloth and really pushing down on where that paint inlay is so that it adheres to the box and transfers that paint image really well. So now that this has completely dried, this has been sitting for about an hour, you can see it kind of, you can see when it's wet that it's a more vibrant color. So you can see that the dry areas, so this is a good indication of when it's completely dry. So what I have to do now is spray that down again a little bit, get that damp, and then peel that paint inlay paper off, and you can see that it leaves that paint design behind. Now you can use these paint inlays up to 3 or 4 times typically. The image, because you're applying paint, every time you use it, you're going to get a little bit, some of that paint is going to come off that paint inlay. So you're going to get a little bit more distressed look each time because you're going to have less and less paint that is being applied to your project. But this is just such a great product because you can use this. The package includes 8 of these papers, and I used basically one full sheet out of the 8 to do these 3 projects, and then I can use these another 2 times, and get a pretty good image. Now I'm removing the paint inlay paper from this last project. It's just a cute little wood block, and I'm going to put a transfer on top of this and make just a little decorative sign. So you want to make sure that you do get enough water saturating that paper. Otherwise, it won't be very easy to pull up and you can leave some of those paper fibers behind. So I am watching this as I'm pulling it up and making sure that it is getting that paper off, leaving it a nice inlay behind, and then spraying as I need to. And I love the distressed look, so I am just going around with a used 320 sandpaper. So it's got a really soft grit at this point. And I'm just distressing around the high points and the edges to give it that aged look. These paint inlays are kind of a naturally distressed look because of how that paint applies. So it's a great vintage look, and so I just want to make sure, not only do I love distressing, but I want to make sure that that look is cohesive. And I did end up using that clear matte spray sealer on these projects, and especially on that paint inlay. So that paint inlay can reactivate very easily with moisture. So you don't want to brush on a sealer onto that because you can reactivate and move that paint around. So the best way to seal that in is with a spray sealer. And now I'm going to rub a transfer over the top of this. So I have made sure that this dried pretty well because that paint inlay, it's a little bit more of a fragile paint than the chalk paint base that I have on there. So I do want to make sure I give a good amount of time for that to dry. So it did dry for a few hours. And now I am just taking my transfer and laying that down, rubbing that on. Now that that is down, I am just taking that transfer backing and rubbing it onto the transfer and burnishing it so that it has a really good adhesion. And here are the finished amazing projects. I love these. Look at that sign. I mean, it's just the cutest little decorative little piece of wood. And then these boxes turned out stinking adorable, didn't they? Didn't they? I love them. They're gorgeous. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video.